How could one small dare destroy everything I built? Why did a single harmless kiss make my husband treat me like a stranger? What happens when you mistake attention for freedom, and the person you mocked turns out to be the only one who never lied to you? My name is Clara Wynn. I'm 33, married, and until a few months ago, I would have said I was the fun one. People always told me I had great energy, that I could turn any boring moment into laughter. My husband Noah was the opposite. Serious, thoughtful, the kind of man who checks a door twice before locking it. He said I made life brighter. I said he made life predictable. At first, we balanced each other perfectly. But then, I started to notice how quiet he was in groups, how his calmness felt like judgment when I joked around. I liked to tease him in front of friends. I'd say things like, "If he ever gets too boring, I'll trade him for someone fun." People laughed. He didn't. I called it lighthearted. He called it cruel. He had this friend, Eli, charming, loud, always the center of attention. Noah trusted him completely, and maybe that made it worse. I liked the way Eli listened when I talked, how he laughed easily. It reminded me of how Noah used to look at me years ago. So when someone at a party dared me to kiss Eli, I told myself it was harmless, a silly game. Everyone was laughing. I thought Noah would roll his eyes, maybe shake his head, and we'd move on. But he didn't. He just watched. And the next morning, he wasn't wearing his ring. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Everyone said I made things entertaining. I was the one who could make a dinner out of silence and a party out of nothing. I liked that reputation. It gave me power. Noah used to say my laughter filled the house. I think he meant it as a compliment, but sometimes it sounded like a warning. Our friends adored me. When we went out, I kept conversations flowing, always teasing, always quick to turn tension into humor. Noah would sit beside me, calm and steady, smiling politely when people laughed at something I said. I used to think he liked it, the way I made everyone notice us. Now I realize maybe he was just tolerating it. The night that started, everything was just supposed to be a work dinner. Eli was there, of course. He and Noah had been friends for years, working on projects together, even going fishing sometimes. Eli was funny in that easy way that men who never think too much often are. I liked that about him. He laughed loud, said whatever came to mind, never seemed worried about how people took it. We sat at a long table with a mix of co-workers and friends. I wore a red dress that I knew would stand out. Noah told me before we left, "It's a bit much for a work thing." I smiled and said, "You should be proud your wife still turns heads." He just nodded, and that annoyed me. At the dinner, the conversation turned playful, as it always did when there was wine. Someone mentioned marriage, and I said, "You have to keep things interesting, or you end up with someone who just talks about bills." A few people laughed. Eli raised his glass and said, "Guess we all know who she means." I laughed and touched his arm, just a second too long maybe, and said, "Well, at least someone listens to me." The whole table laughed. Noah smiled, but his jaw tightened. When we got home, he was quiet. I asked what was wrong, already knowing. He said, "You make me feel like the joke in every room." I said, "You're overreacting. People were laughing with us." He said, "No, they were laughing at me." I tried to hug him, told him he was being sensitive. He pulled away and said, "I'm tired of being the punchline." Then he went upstairs. I stood there in the living room, frustrated. I wanted to shout that he was ruining a perfectly good night, but instead, I poured another glass of wine and told myself he'd calm down. The next morning, he canceled the couple's weekend we'd planned for the next month. I asked why, and he said, "You don't need me there to be entertained." He didn't say it cruelly. That was the worst part. It was calm, almost detached. I said, "Don't punish me because you can't take a joke." He said, "You don't tell jokes, you test limits." That line stuck with me. I told my mother later, and she laughed, saying, "He's just too serious. Men like that always are." I liked that she took my side so easily. It made me feel justified. A week later, Sophie from work invited me to Eli's birthday party. "Noah's coming too, right?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "Probably not. He doesn't enjoy fun." She laughed and said, "Then it's his loss." I told myself that night would be my chance to prove to everyone, and maybe to myself, that I could still have fun without him sulking over it. I didn't know that was the night I'd lose everything. Eli's birthday party was loud, messy, and full of laughter, exactly the kind of night I loved. The room buzzed with music and the smell of food and wine. People were already half drunk by the time I arrived. I wore something casual but flattering, and when Eli saw me, he smiled wide. "Clara Wynn actually came out without her husband," he teased. I said, "He's allergic to joy." Everyone laughed, and I felt the familiar warmth of attention settle around me like a spotlight. We started with dinner, then drinks, then a game someone suggested, truth or dare. It was childish, but fun. Everyone was loose and laughing. I told myself I was just being social. When it was my turn, Sophie grinned and said, "Okay, Clara, dare." I laughed, said, "I'm not afraid of anything." She looked around, her eyes landing on Eli. "Kiss him. Just one kiss. You two already flirt like a sitcom." The group howled with laughter. I rolled my eyes, pretending to hesitate. I saw Eli's smirk, the same teasing one he'd had at that dinner weeks ago. My heart pounded a little faster, not from attraction exactly, but from the thrill, the attention, the challenge. I said, "It's just a dare. No one dies." He said, "Only if Noah doesn't find out." Everyone laughed again. I could feel my face flush, partly from the drinks, partly from pride. "He'll survive," I said. Then I leaned forward and kissed Eli. Quick, not even a full second, but enough. Enough for the laughter to erupt again, enough for someone to snap a photo, enough for me to feel the heat of something crossing a line. I looked up and saw Noah standing in the doorway. I hadn't even noticed him arrive. He was supposed to be home, but there he was, holding a small box. Eli's gift, probably. He froze when he saw me. Our eyes met, and for a second, the room fell silent. Then someone made a joke. The laughter started again, and I tried to laugh too, to turn it into something harmless. But Noah didn't laugh. He just set the box on the table and left. I told myself it was fine. I told everyone, "He's just jealous. He'll cool off." But inside, I felt cold. Later that night, I went home expecting an argument. Instead, he was sitting on the couch, calm again. I said, "It was just a game. You can't be mad about that." He said, "You kissed my friend." I said, "Because someone dared me to. It wasn't romantic." He said, "It was public." I said, "So what? Everyone knows it was a joke." He looked at me for a long time, then said, "You can joke about anything, Clara, except respect." I started crying, saying he was trying to make me feel like a terrible person over something small. He said, "I don't have to make you feel that way. You already do." Then he stood up and went upstairs. I texted Sophie later, asking if everyone thought it was bad. She said, "It was funny, but yeah." He looked devastated. I replied, "He always looks devastated." The next morning, he wasn't wearing his ring. It sat neatly on the kitchen counter beside a mug of untouched coffee. When I asked why, he said, "You don't take it seriously anymore, so why should I?" I said, "Because you're married to me." He said, "No, I'm married to someone who used to care about being kind." He went to work, leaving me standing there, speechless. At first, I thought he was bluffing, trying to scare me. I even called my mother, told her he was being dramatic. She said, "Don't let him control you. Men hate when they can't make you feel small." So I told myself I was right, that he was punishing me for being confident, for being seen. That evening, I went to dinner with Sophie and a few co-workers. I told them what happened, twisting it into something lighter, a story about my insecure husband who couldn't take a joke. Everyone laughed. It felt good, for a moment, to be the one telling the story instead of living it. But when I got home, the house was too quiet. There was no music, no TV, no sound of him moving around upstairs. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. On the table, there was a note. "I don't know how to compete with your games, Clara. I'm not playing anymore." The words were simple, calm, final. I crumpled it, threw it in the trash, and told myself he'd come back once he cooled off. He always did. But that night, for the first time, I realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember what his laughter even sounded like anymore. For days, Noah said almost nothing. He went to work early, came home late, spoke only to Maya, our daughter. She was 7, too young to understand tension but old enough to sense it. She'd watch us across the dinner table with those careful eyes, like she was waiting for one of us to start shouting. But Noah never shouted, and that made everything worse. He started doing small, deliberate things that scared me. Not because they were angry, but because they were organized. He began keeping separate folders for bills and receipts. He stopped sharing his work calendar. He even changed the password on the joint bank account. When I asked why, he said, "I'm simplifying things." I said, "You're punishing me." He said, "I'm protecting myself." That calmness was unbearable. I'd rather he screamed, accused me, broke something, anything but that steady tone that made me feel like he'd already made peace with losing me. One evening, he was folding laundry in silence. I tried to make him laugh, the way I used to. I said, "You're really committed to being the world's most boring man, aren't you?" He said, "You're really committed to pretending boredom excuses cruelty." I rolled my eyes, told him he was overreacting. He looked up and said, "You humiliated me in front of my oldest friend." I said, "It was a joke. People kiss on dares all the time." He said, "People who respect each other don't." That night, I called my mother, crying. She said, "Sweetheart, men forgive everything if you stay calm. Just act normal. He'll miss you." So I did. I tried to act like nothing had changed. I made his favorite dinner. I even laughed extra loud at dinner when Maya told a story about school. But Noah didn't respond. When I reached for his hand, he moved it away gently, like he didn't want to embarrass me in front of our daughter. Later that night, after Maya went to bed, I followed him into his study. "You can't keep doing this," I said. "It's not healthy." He said, "You think I'm angry?" I said, "Obviously you are." He said, "No, I'm done being angry." He closed his laptop and looked at me. "Do you even know what you've done?" I said, "I made a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake." He said, "You turned our life into entertainment. You kissed a man you knew I trusted more than anyone, and then you laughed about it. That's not a mistake, Clara. That's a choice." I shouted that he was twisting everything, that he was being dramatic, that he was making it all about him. He didn't shout back. He just said, "Exactly," and walked upstairs. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. On the kitchen counter was his ring, again, but this time beside it, a printed appointment slip for a family law consultation. When I saw it, my chest went tight. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. When he came home that night, I demanded to know what he was doing. He said, "Making sure our daughter grows up with stability." I said, "You're making it sound like I'm a bad mother." He said, "No, just a careless one." I wanted to throw something. Instead, I grabbed his ring off the counter and said, "Fine. If this means so much to you, take it back." He said, "It doesn't mean anything anymore." I stared at him, desperate. "So what? You're leaving me?" He said, "I already have." He walked away before I could say another word. That night, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the ring in my palm. I hated that my hands were shaking. I told myself he was bluffing, trying to scare me into an apology. He was too calm, too methodical. He couldn't really mean it. But deep down, I knew he did. A week later, an envelope arrived with his lawyer's name on it. Inside was a request for preliminary marital review and property division. The words looked cold on paper. I read them twice before it sank in. He wasn't bluffing. He was planning a legal separation. When I called him at work, he didn't pick up. I drove there anyway. His receptionist looked uncomfortable when I walked in. "He's in a meeting," she said. I said, "I'll wait." When he finally came out, he looked surprised to see me but not moved. I said, "We're really doing this now? Papers and lawyers?" He said, "I told you I was done talking." I said, "You're punishing me because your pride got hurt." He said, "No, I'm protecting myself because your pride hurt us." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "You're acting like I cheated." He said, "You did. Maybe not with your body, but definitely with your loyalty." I followed him to his car, begging him to stop, to think about Maya. He said, "That's exactly what I'm doing." I went home and called my mother. She said, "This is ridiculous. He can't just erase you over a joke. Get a lawyer of your own and scare him a little." But I didn't want to scare him. I wanted him to forgive me. I just didn't know how to ask anymore. A few days later, he came home with a folder in his hand. He sat at the kitchen table while I hovered near the counter. He said, "I want this to be civil. You can keep the house. I'll move out." I said, "You can't just leave." He said, "I can, and I'm doing it the right way." He opened the folder. Inside were papers, property division drafts, custody arrangements, lists of accounts. He'd thought of everything. I said, "You've been planning this for weeks." He said, "Since the kiss." I said, "You're destroying our family because of one moment." He said, "No. That moment just showed me what kind of family we had." I wanted to argue, to make him feel guilty, but something about his tone made me stop. It wasn't anger. It was finality. The next morning, I woke up and found his closet half empty. His side of the bed was neatly made. I called him, but he didn't answer. Later that afternoon, his mother showed up. She said she came to pick up some of his things. She looked around the house, our house, like it already belonged to someone else. Before she left, she said, "You know, I warned him once. I told him laughter can be cruel when it's used to hide contempt." I said, "You never liked me." She said, "I liked the version of you that cared about him." That night, I went to see Sophie. I told her everything. The papers, the silence, the way everyone suddenly looked at me differently. She said, "Clara, it wasn't just a kiss. Everyone saw how you looked at Eli. It didn't look like a game." I said, "You were there. You know it was harmless." She sighed. "Maybe it was harmless to you." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. When I got home, the house felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. I went to Maya's room. She was drawing at her little desk. I asked what she was making. She said, "A picture of Daddy's new house." My throat tightened. "He told you?" She nodded. "He said I can visit both of you whenever I want." I sat on the floor beside her and watched her color the picture. 2 houses, side by side, connected by a line she called the road. She looked at me and said, "Are you sad?" I forced a smile. "A little." She said, "Daddy said it's okay to be sad if you did something wrong." I didn't know what to say. That night, I found another envelope in the mail, a copy of his legal filing stamped with the court seal. Attached was a printed photo, me and Eli at the party, laughing right after the kiss. In the background, blurred but visible, was Noah's face, watching. It wasn't anger on his face in that photo. It was something worse, understanding. I sat on the floor holding the picture. And for the first time since it happened, I stopped trying to tell myself it was harmless. Because seeing it through his eyes, I knew the truth. It wasn't the kiss that broke him. It was the way I laughed right after. The mediation room smelled like coffee and quiet judgment. I had told myself all morning that I'd stay calm, that I'd look put together, reasonable, not guilty. My lawyer, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, whispered that it was just a discussion. But the stack of papers in front of Noah said otherwise. He was already seated when I walked in. Blue shirt, sleeves rolled, wedding ring gone. He looked calm, rested, like someone who had already lived through the worst part. I tried to smile. He didn't return it. The mediator started by explaining the purpose of the meeting: to establish fair terms and clarify disputed matters. Her voice was neutral, gentle. I felt safe for a moment. Then Noah's lawyer slid a thick folder across the table. "This," he said, "contains all relevant documentation." I opened it. Screenshots, printouts, photos, every joke I'd posted, every caption about married life being overrated, every picture from Eli's party, my own words printed in black and white. Under each post, dates and comments were highlighted. It looked clinical, as if someone had dissected my personality and labeled the evidence. I said, "You really went through my social media?" Noah said, "I lived through it. I just needed proof this time." My voice rose before I could stop it. "Proof of what? That people like me? That I'm funny?" He said, "That you don't care who you hurt as long as you're the center of attention." The mediator asked us to lower our voices. My lawyer squeezed my arm. I forced a smile and said, "We're fine." Then came the next folder, the financial one: receipts, account transfers, hotel records. My stomach clenched when I saw the date from the night of Eli's party. One hotel charge under my name. I opened my mouth, ready to explain, but Noah spoke first. "I'm not accusing you of anything physical," he said. "You don't have to prove innocence. You already proved disrespect." I said, "You're twisting everything to look worse than it is." He said, "You did that when you laughed." It felt like the air had gone out of the room. The mediator asked about Maya next: custody terms, visitation schedules, school routines. I told them I wanted shared custody. Noah said, "I want primary custody until she's older. I want stability." I said, "You're taking my daughter away because of a dare?" He said, "Because she deserves to learn that words have weight, and that trust isn't a game." The mediator tried to soften things, said we could revisit arrangements in time, but I could feel the decision already solidifying in his tone. During a break, I followed him into the hallway. "You can't just erase me from her life," I said. He turned to me, quiet and steady. "I'm not erasing you. You did that yourself." I said, "I've said I'm sorry." He said, "You don't say sorry, you perform it." I felt my throat burn. I whispered, "You used to love me for being fun." He said, "I did, until fun meant disrespect." Then he walked away. When we returned to the room, the mediator summarized our positions. My lawyer said I was open to compromise. Noah's lawyer said his client already had a plan: financial split, custody, property transfer. It was all typed, outlined, and signed by him. I barely recognized the signature. At the end of the session, the mediator asked if either of us had anything to add. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would make him remember the good parts of us. But the only words that came out were, "You're being cruel." He looked at me, calm again, and said, "No, I'm being fair." Then, as everyone stood to leave, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wedding ring, and placed it on the table in front of me. "You said a dare doesn't mean anything," he said. "Neither does this anymore." He left before I could respond. I stared at the ring for a long time, until the mediator gently asked if I was ready to go. I nodded, slipped the ring into my purse, and walked outside into the parking lot. The sun was too bright. Cars passed. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. That loud, easy kind of laughter I used to love. I froze. It sounded exactly like mine. And for the first time, it didn't feel freeing. It felt cruel. The final decree arrived 2 weeks later. A plain envelope, no handwriting, no drama, just an ending folded in official paper. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. Inside were the finalized separation documents and a smaller note in Noah's neat handwriting. You wanted everything to be a joke. Now I understand. You just didn't want to feel anything real. I read it 3 times before I realized my hands were shaking. I laughed out loud, a dry sound that barely made it past my throat. He had turned my own words against me, and he did it without cruelty. That made it hurt more. I moved into a small apartment a few streets away. It was quiet, too quiet. The walls didn't echo like our old house. They just absorbed everything I said, like even the air had stopped listening. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once the tension faded, maybe we'd talk again. Maybe he'd miss me. Maybe Maya would tell him how much I'd changed. But he didn't call. When I picked up Maya for my first weekend with her, she seemed different. Polite, careful. She didn't run into my arms like she used to. I asked if she was happy at Daddy's new house. She nodded and said, "It's peaceful." Peaceful. She'd learned that word from him. I tried to make the weekend fun, games, movies, her favorite meals, but she didn't laugh much. When I asked if she wanted to talk about Daddy, she said softly, "He said not to make you sad." That night, after she fell asleep, I sat on the couch scrolling through old photos. There we were, smiling, laughing, arms around each other. I'd used to post captions like, "Married life, the longest dare I ever took." Back then, I thought I was being clever. Now, it read like a confession. A few days later, I saw Noah in the school parking lot. I had gone early to pick up Maya, but he was already there, standing by his car, talking to another parent. He looked relaxed, lighter. I called out his name before I could stop myself. He turned, nodded politely, but didn't smile. I walked over. "Can we talk?" He said, "About what?" I said, "About us." He said, "There is no us, Clara. There's just what's left." I said, "I didn't mean for things to go this far." He said, "You always say that after you go too far." I tried to laugh it off to sound casual. "You're still angry." He shook his head. "No. I stopped being angry when I realized you don't understand the difference between fun and cruelty." I said, "You're twisting everything." He said, "No, I'm just not playing anymore." He opened his car door, but I stepped closer. "You can't just erase everything we had," I said. "We loved each other." He paused. "I did," he said quietly. "But love can't survive as a joke." He drove away before I could answer. For a long time, I stood there, watching the dust settle from his tires. Parents passed by, kids laughed, life continued. But I stayed still, stuck between disbelief and something that felt like regret. That night, I went home and poured a glass of wine, even though it was only 5. I told myself I deserved it, that I'd been through enough. I opened my laptop and typed his name into the search bar. There it was, photos from the party, the one where it all started. Someone had tagged everyone that night. The picture was still there, me and Eli smiling, surrounded by people laughing. In the background, blurry but unmistakable, Noah's face, watching. I stared at it for a long time. The kiss itself wasn't visible, just the aftermath. But it was all there in my expression. The pride, the smugness, the belief that I could make anything funny, that I could charm my way out of consequences. I right-clicked on the image, hovered over delete, but didn't press it. It didn't matter anymore. The internet had already kept the proof. The next weekend, When I dropped Maya back at Noah's, he came to the door, polite as always. I said, "Do you ever think we could fix it?" He said, "Fix what?" I said, "Us." He looked at me, and for a second I saw something soften, maybe pity, maybe sadness. Then he said, "You can't fix something you don't respect." I said, "I was wrong, okay? I just wanted to have fun. I didn't think it mattered." He said, "Everything matters when someone is watching you to learn what love looks like." I didn't know if he meant himself or Maya, and I didn't ask. He stepped back, nodded, and closed the door gently. When I got home that night, I sat by the window with the lights off. Outside, laughter drifted from the neighboring apartment, people talking, joking, living. It sounded like another world. I opened my phone, scrolled to my messages with Sophie. The last one she'd sent weeks ago still sat unread. "You pushed him too far this time." I had never replied. I started typing a response. "You were right." But I didn't send it. Instead, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out Noah's ring. I'd kept it since the mediation. It was cold in my hand. I thought about how many times I'd made fun of that ring, called it just a piece of metal, joked that marriage was a long dare with paperwork. Now it was the only thing that felt real. I held it tightly until my palm hurt, then whispered, "I didn't mean to lose everything." The words sounded pathetic in the dark. When I finally put the ring down, I noticed something small on the inside, an engraving I'd forgotten about. For the quiet moments. I remembered when he had it made. He'd said he loved me most in the quiet, when I wasn't performing, when I was just there. And I'd laughed, told him, quiet is boring. Now quiet was all I had. The next morning, I walked to the park near the apartment. It was early, the grass still damp, the air cool. Children were playing, parents chatting. I saw one little girl trip, and her father rushed over to help her up, brushing dirt from her knees. She laughed, and he laughed too. The sound soft, ordinary, full of love. I turned away. When I got home, I placed the ring in a small glass bowl on the table, the same way Noah used to leave it when he was tired of pretending things were fine. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like truth. Later that night, I found myself replaying the dare in my head. Every laugh, every cheer, every second I thought I was winning. The way Noah's face looked when he saw me. Not angry, just finished. That look has never left me. I see it every time I close my eyes. People still tell me I have a great laugh. They say it like a compliment. But now, when I hear it, it sounds hollow, like someone else's voice echoing from a place I can't go back to. I thought the dare was a game. It turned out to be the moment I bet my marriage on laughter and lost everything worth being serious about. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.